Hey guys, Caleb here with DSLR Video Shooter, and one of the biggest questions I get asked all the time is which Aputure light should I buy? So I thought it would be kind of interesting to compare the current lineup from Aputure, which now includes the brand new 300X, which is a very interesting light, and we'll be getting into its specs as well as how this whole lineup compares, which light is going to be best for you. Before we jump into the current lineup from Aputure, I do want to disclose that Aputure did send this 300X to me, no strings attached, no requirements, and they're not seeing this video before it's released. And I'll also note that I've purchased multiples of these two fixtures. We're actually using another 120D Mark II to light this and several other ones behind me. So let's jump into the current lineup from Aputure, which includes the 120D Mark II over here. We've got the 300D Mark II and the brand new 300X. There's also a future 600D that's apparently in the works from Aputure, and that's just going to be a monster with probably close to double the output of the 300D. So before we jump into all the specs comparisons between all of these lights, let's talk about the 300X and what's new with it, what it's bringing to the entire line. In short, the 300X is almost identical to the 300D with one huge distinction, and that is that it is a bicolor light. So the 300D Mark II is a 5500 Kelvin super bright light. This light, the 300X, is a 2700 Kelvin to 6500 Kelvin, giving you a huge range of color options. Now that bicolor range comes at two costs. First is the price. It's $100 more than the original 300D Mark II. The second cost is going to be the final output of the light. Since it's a bicolor light, there's multiple colors of chips being used, and you're only probably going to be using a certain percentage, not all of them at once. So you're not going to have the same output of the 300D Mark II, and we'll talk about that here in a second. There are some other small differences. For instance, you'll notice the red accent on this light. This one's got carbon fiber if you're into that. The actual light on the very front, you'll notice instead of a clear little piece of glass, we have this special diffuser that is designed to combine both of those colors and give you the same metrics or same style of light as the 300D. So you're not going to get weird different patches of color. It's all uniform no matter what setting this is set to, and it'll work with all of Aputure's modifiers without any consequences, which is awesome. Other than that, the body is exactly the same. When it comes to the controller, it also has some carbon fiber accents compared to the original 300D Mark II controller. And there's also an additional dial on the front that allows you to control the color temperature, and Aputure has also thrown in a little button that has presets. So instead of spinning the ring around to change the color temp, you can just press that button and it'll cycle through 27, 3200, 4300, 5600, and finally 6500 Kelvin. The 300X also has a new output mode in the menu system, allowing you to control max output, which is essentially as bright as the light can go at any color temp. Or if you want to change the color temperature but not have the brightness change, you can choose the constant mode. And as you go through the range of color temperatures, your output will be fixed. So that's what's going on with this new 300X from Aputure. Now let's talk about the full lineup. On the bottom, when it comes to price and specs, we have the 120D Mark II. This light clocks in at under $800 and is a 5600 Kelvin only light, and it's the weakest when it comes to output, but it's a phenomenal all-around light. I'm using one right now. I rarely go over 50% for videos like this, even with wider shots. So it's a great way to go if you're doing smaller setups like this, maybe for YouTube. But if you're going to be doing lots of modifying, things like book lights, big sheets of diffusion, bouncing a lot of light, that's where that light is going to struggle a little bit. But the perk is that you have a small fixture, which is very lightweight, and a smaller controller. So here's the 300D Mark II controller. It's huge. Here is the 120D Mark II controller. Smaller, has a built-in power supply, so you don't have external bricks and stuff. It's just one single thing that you plug into the light. Very easy to use, comes with a remote and Sidus link, which is how you can control all of these lights with an application on your phone. The next light in the lineup is the 300D Mark II. This is the monster when it comes to output. It is by far the brightest light that Aputure sells. When you compare it to the 120D when it comes to a lux reading, it is significantly brighter, as you can see here. The 300D Mark II also has better color when you look at extended CRI readings compared to the 120D Mark II. So it's a much brighter light, and it's really, really good when it comes to modifying the light. So if you want to bounce the light off of a ceiling or a wall and then put some diffusion in front of it, the 300D is going to be your friend because you have plenty of output to do that. But if you're doing a setup like this where you just have a big softbox like I do just off frame, this is probably going to be overkill, and you're rarely going to get into that higher level output. And finally, we have the 300X, which is a very interesting light when you compare it to the other two. Some would say it's essentially a weaker bicolor 300D, but I think a more accurate way to think about it is a 120D Mark II that's bicolor. So it is larger, obviously, and has the bigger controller. In certain modes, it's brighter than the 120D Mark II. In others, it's about the same or lower. So here's a look at how the 300X compares to the other two. So at daylight or 5500 Kelvin on these lights, we have, of course, the 300D Mark II at the top with almost 1200 lux at 1 meter, the 300X clocking in at just under 7000 lux, and finally the 120D coming in the rear at 5860. Now the 300X, of course, has all the different color modes, which I also measured, and when we compare those to the 120D Mark II, you'll notice that it's just brighter than the 120D Mark II at every color mode except for 2700 Kelvin. Jumping over to color or extended CRI readings, the 300D and 300X are very similar at very high 90s when it comes to those readings. The 120D kind of falls behind the others with a slight drop in CRI rating, but it's still very good for its class. And what's amazing is the 300X at all color options is really, really good. One of the best I've seen so far. So any of the color temperature settings on this light are going to reproduce color very nicely. All of these lights are fairly accurate when it comes to their color temperature. So both of these are rated for 55, and I found those numbers were pretty close when it comes to actually reading the lights with a meter. But what blew me away is the accuracy of the 300X. At all color temperatures, this thing was crazy close to what it was rated to. So if you set this light to 2700 Kelvin, it's going to be doggone close to 2700. And this is very, very rare in the LED light world, especially when it comes to bicolor lights. So this light, you can accurately set it on your controller and it will be almost exactly that number. So in conclusion, for smaller setups like this, the 120D Mark II is plenty fine enough when it comes to output. The 300D is the beast. You can use it at full Monty, bouncing light, doing all kinds of crazy stuff, or you can turn it down and essentially use it like you would a 120D Mark II, but you will lose, the smallness of the 120D because the head of the fixture is larger and all of that stuff. The 300X is kind of the best of both worlds in a way. You're not going to have the output of the 300D, so you're definitely going to take a hit there, but it is brighter than the 120D, and that color is just one of the most accurate I've seen so far when it comes to testing LED lights. You can set this thing to 3400 Kelvin and you're going to get 3400 Kelvin, which is so rare amongst LED lights. The color is great. Again, the output is better than the 120D, but it is the most expensive light of the group. So all things to consider. It's the first large chip from Aputure with bicolor, and it's a really phenomenal light. So if you've got the money and you don't need super duper output like the 300D, the 300X is a great buy. So that is going to wrap up this video. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.